All right, welcome everyone to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at some case overviews from an entity we're calling ABC IQ. It's really a peek behind the curtain of intelligence, counterintelligence. We're going to be looking at cases that deal with identity, security, and how help is given in some pretty complex situations.
Yeah. What makes this stuff so fascinating is just how many different types of problems they had to deal with. I mean, we're talking real world problems, right? Real people, real organizations.
Right, like, going through these sources, we see this pattern, right? Technology being messed with, international contractors in trouble, and this whole question of who is this person really
hmm
that keeps coming up. And then the really interesting part is seeing how they actually help these people in these, often super stressful situations.
And it's important for everyone listening to know that we're going to get into the details of these cases, but we're absolutely not going to give out any personal info, right? No names, no contact details.
Exactly. It's about the situations and how they handled them. So, okay, let's jump into the first case. This one takes place between May and September of 2020. It's about a UN private contractor who is in a bad spot. And what's interesting is that this all started when ABCIQ's own technology was compromised, which obviously made it harder for them to work securely. And at the same time, they get this request for help from this guy, this contractor.
Whoa, that's a tough one, right? Your own security's messed up, and then you have to help someone else. Talk about pressure. So this guy, he worked as a UN contractor for a few months in 2020.
Right. We don't know his age or anything too specific, but it looks like he might have been, either Christian or Caucasian. But here's where things get tricky. He shows up with 3 passports, each with a different name. They tried all sorts of ways to confirm his identity, phone calls, video calls, you name it, but nothing was conclusive.
See, that's a huge red flag, right?
Right.
In intelligence work, that kind of thing makes you think someone's trying really hard to hide who they are, and that usually means something's up.
Totally. So on top of all that, there were 3 different addresses listed for him: Amsterdam, Dubai, and Los Angeles. And he had profiles on Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, the whole 9 yards. Oh, and to make things even more interesting, they had coordinates for a vessel too, like a boat. 25 degrees, 41 minutes, 50.0 seconds north, 53 degrees, 36 minutes, 01.7 seconds east.
A boat. Okay, so now we're talking international intrigue. I mean, it doesn't solve the identity problem, but it definitely adds another layer to this puzzle.
Right. So why was this guy in distress? Well, he was stuck on this boat during COVID. Total isolation, no access to any mental health support. The overview really emphasizes that. And the internet connection was terrible, so even video calls to try and figure out who he was were a nightmare.
Man, I can't imagine stuck on a boat during a pandemic with no one to talk to, and then on top of that, having to deal with all this identity stuff, that's a recipe for a breakdown.
Right. So what did ABCIQ do? Well, because he was clearly in a bad way, they stepped in and provided direct support. Offered aid to the vessel, tried to get him help through consular services. They were using everything to communicate: Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Skype, whatever worked.
So, really pulling out all the stops, trying to navigate this, going above and beyond, I'd say, given all the unknowns.
Definitely. Now, here's where things get even weirder. This guy, he looked Caucasian, right?
Yeah.
But he had a Nigerian or maybe African accent, and it just didn't quite fit with how he looked or, what you'd usually expect. And get this, they even got the Dubai Airport Authority potentially involved, which they even admit is not something they usually do.
Whoa, wait, the accent didn't match? Okay, now that's really strange. That definitely throws another wrench into the whole thing. And the Dubai airport, they really were going all out to help this guy.
Yeah. Now, about money. He had a USA passport, but the other 2 were still questionable. He also had 2 Google scratch cards worth $150 each. And here's another weird thing. They had contracts with him, but never collected any fees.
So maybe using those scratch cards because he couldn't use regular banking
Yeah.
and not taking money, it seems like they were really concerned about him, even if they didn't know for sure who he was.
Right. And there's a note that he supposedly gave legal guardianship of a 9-year-old boy named Michael to someone, but they couldn't confirm the banking details for that in the USA. They even looked into different ways to get payment, like digital transfers versus wire transfers. And then, get this, in February 2021, his LinkedIn profiles were showing up as paid accounts.
Hold on, so he's active on LinkedIn after all this. Okay, so maybe he did get to safety in 2020 like they thought, but then why the new identity? It just raises more questions.
Exactly. And, one thing this case really highlights is how important mental health support is for people who work on ships. They're isolated, they're in high-pressure jobs, and it seems like that's often overlooked.
For sure. I mean, we've all heard about the stress of being a seafarer, and this just shows how vital mental health resources are for them.
So how did ABCIQ actually try to help him? You know, with all this uncertainty about his identity, they focused on empathy, building resilience, celebrating small wins, and sharing their own experiences to build trust. It's a very human approach, isn't it?
Yeah, really trying to connect with him on a personal level, it makes sense, especially when someone's in such a vulnerable position. Building trust must have been crucial.
Oh, and there's one more bizarre detail. In July 2020, someone saw a guy who might have been him in a Walmart parking lot. He was on a scooter, had a leg cast, and was talking about things like bionic knees and levitation devices.
Wait, what? Bionic knees and levitation. Okay, now that's just straight out of a sci-fi movie. Was this really him? I mean, if it was, it kind of makes you question his, well, everything.
Right. Okay, moving on to case 2. This one's even more secretive. It's about another guy, but we don't know any of his contact info. And guess what? Same issue with the identity check inconclusive. 3 passports, 3 names.
So many passports, so many names. It makes you wonder, was this a common problem for them? Like, was this something they saw a lot?
It definitely speaks to just how hard it can be to know who you're really dealing with.
Yeah. So this guy claimed to be in Winnipeg, Canada. He reached out through a landline, and there were concerns about, national security. They thought he might be a former prisoner trying to get back into society. But the overview makes it very clear that this had nothing to do with race.
National security. Okay, things are getting serious. And a landline. That's interesting. Maybe trying to stay under the radar.
Maybe. So this guy had an Indian or maybe Asian subcontinental accent, and he got the phone number by hacking into someone's LinkedIn account. He actually contacted them twice looking for help.
Hacking LinkedIn. So we're not dealing with your average Joe here. This guy's got some tech skills, or at least knows people who do.
Yeah. And the things he wanted help with were all over the place. Like, he was struggling with fitting in with the whole idea of colonization. But then he was also complaining about teenagers vandalizing cars with fire extinguishers. Whoa, that's a wild mix. Big picture stuff. And then teenagers and fire extinguishers. It's almost like he was testing them or trying to throw them off.
Maybe. So what did ABCIQ do? They told him straight up, call the RCMP, the police. Don't try to handle this yourself.
Good advice. Let the authorities deal with that. It's not their job to play vigilante.
Exactly. Now, the overview goes on to explain a bit about how ABCIQ works. They're about 500 kilometers away from Winnipeg. They don't get involved in criminal reform programs or deal with at-risk youth. They describe themselves as an online platform for university and career skills and a global marketplace. They're all about using technology efficiently and developing secure programs. High-level stuff.
Okay, so that helps us understand their role a little better. They're remote, tech-focused, and definitely not cops or social workers. Got it.
Right. On to case 3. This one goes from 2016 to 2018, and it's about money and identity. Surprise, surprise, another guy with 3 passports.
Yeah.
Netherlands, USA, look like Beverly Hills, and a UK passport, but they couldn't confirm if it was real. His name's kept secret, obviously. And just like the first guy, his voice didn't seem to match how he looked. Caucasian, blonde hair, fair skin, but with a Nigerian or African accent.
Hold on, another Caucasian guy with a Nigerian accent. That's the second time we've seen that. There's got to be a story there. I mean, what are the chances? It really makes you wonder about what's going on.
It's definitely strange. Okay, so this guy was based in Sharjah in the UAE. He was working as an oil consultant, dealing with these big wholesale deals involving ships. But they don't say exactly which ships or where they were.
Oil, the Middle East, multiple identities. This sounds like it could have some serious global implications.
You got it. They even said his deals were messing with oil prices and these pump payments. The overview even mentions the Aramco IPO, that huge oil company.
Wow, so he was a big player, and if he was up to no good, that could have affected a lot of people. It's no wonder they were looking into him.
They looked into all kinds of things, transferring money, checking if banks in different countries were legit, the basics of how different currencies work, how to confirm someone's identity, e-transfers, how easy different banking systems were to use, even fractional reserve systems and negative interest rates.
It's like a crash course in international finance. They were leaving no stone unturned, that's for sure, trying to figure out every possible angle.
Oh, and in 2018, they even mentioned syntax of SynSecure key Bitcoin blockchain economics. Sounds like they were looking at those new technologies for secure transactions.
Bitcoin in 2018, forward thinking. That was still pretty new back then, but it was clear that this kind of technology could change the game when it came to money and security.
Now, they quickly mentioned a bunch of other cases, too. Case 4 was a UN surgeon in Syria who needed help. They tried to reach him through Facebook and WhatsApp, but the tech just wasn't working out there.
Yeah, imagine trying to get help in a war zone with bad internet. That must have been frustrating. A real reminder of how lucky we are to have reliable communication.
Case 5 was about that diplomatic embargo on Qatar from 2017 to 2021. They were analyzing media codes from Al Jazeera, checking if things were true or made up. They even mentioned these 61 codes they found, maybe about Iranian nuclear weapons or something involving Russia and the UAE, but that wasn't confirmed. They also talked about naval stuff and natural disasters, all while trying to promote peace and understanding.
That's a whole other world, isn't it? Decoding messages, trying to understand what's real and what's not in the middle of a huge international conflict.
Case 6 was about counterintelligence work in Canada, security breaches, people getting new passports, and managing reputations online and offline. They even mentioned the Paris Convention, which is a big deal for international trade, and the Burkos method for valuing intellectual property.
So not just about spies and secrets, it's about protecting ideas and reputations too. The whole landscape's changed with the internet, and it sounds like they were on top of it.
Case 7 was short. Corrupt politicians with multiple passports. They specifically mentioned 4.
4 passports. Man, these guys really like their passports, don't they? It's almost like a collector's item.
Case 8 was about an organization using intellectual property, specifically some U.S. University college IP, supposedly worth around $4 million a year. They were trying to use it for things like helping students catch up on credits, reforming education, and making sure things were compliant. They even talked about getting public funding for businesses based on this IP.
So taking ideas from the academic world and putting them to work in the real world, that's a really interesting angle, and it shows how valuable intellectual property can be.
Case 9 was a heavy one. A possible murder, or maybe wrongful death, in Arizona back in 2017. They suspected poisoning with arsenic and warfarin. There were issues with insurance, and they even mentioned potential hate crimes against Ukrainians, cannabis users, and Muslims. The overview even talked about the RCMP in Yorkton and possible charges of murder one and wrongful death. They even questioned the doctor's assessment of the patient's condition. And there was a big warning about the trouble you could get into for helping someone use fake passports.
That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Poisoning, hate crimes, international connections, and yeah, messing with passports is definitely not something you want to be caught doing.
Case 10 was about someone abusing their power and ordering an assault. They specifically mentioned the Geneva Conventions on torture.
That's just awful. Using your power to hurt someone is never okay, and it sounds like they were dealing with some serious human rights violations.
Cases 11 and 12 were both about sexual predators. Case 11 was about online predators and how they might be exploiting ABCIQ's systems. Case 12 was about in-person discussions about predators and maybe trying to get jobs for people who had been in prison or had turned their lives around.
So dealing with a really tough issue, both online and offline, it makes you think about how technology can be used for good or bad, and the challenges of rehabilitating offenders.
And finally, they mentioned some cases from 2021 and 2022. Medical negligence and surprise more, multiple passports. They also talk about legal stuff, keeping juries away from the public, protecting assets, how long the government has to take action, and defining some really important legal agreements. The Geneva Conventions on torture, the Paris Conventions for trade, the Berne Conventions on copyright, and what exactly makes something murder one.
So still dealing with complex cases and having to be up to date on all those international laws.
Yeah. And there's a note about a project they did in 2021, Unchemical Engineer Security Systems LinkedIn Analysis. Sounds like they were analyzing conversations in secure systems to figure out how to help people, all while being respectful of their privacy and following the rules.
Using all that data for good, basically. That's a pretty amazing application of technology.
Right. And they even talked about social distancing, but in this weird context of building tech closed systems, weekend respite, short stay, training gray areas.
That's cryptic. Sounds like some internal jargon. Maybe a way of describing how they manage access and training for sensitive information.
And last but not least, a discussion about, well, this is a little out there, but edible or conditional responses related to growing stuff, distribution, testing, climate change, and transportation, all in the context of medical education.
Oh, and using simulations and real-life case studies to teach people.
Wow, that's a mouthful. It sounds like they were thinking about how different fields like agriculture and medicine can learn from each other. Always pushing the boundaries, I guess.
Yep.
So there you have it, a whirlwind tour of some very interesting and very complex cases. It's pretty amazing to see all the different challenges that ABCIQ had to tackle, all while keeping things confidential. The things that really stood out for me were those identity issues. So many passports, so many questions. And then seeing how they provided support in such tough situations, often remotely. And of course, all those glimpses into big international events, even if we don't have all the details.
I agree. It's fascinating stuff. For me, those cases where the guy's appearance didn't match his accent, those were really intriguing. It makes you wonder what their stories were. And using high-tech tools to address basic human needs, that was really cool to see. And yeah, those hints of international intrigue. You can't help but want no more.
Exactly. So for all of you listening, think about this. What kind of help is being given right now all over the world to people in need? What are the ethical questions we need to be asking as we use more and more technology to solve problems? What will the future of this kind of digital work look like? It's a lot to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.